Thank you so much. I assume everyone can hear me. I'm Fred Posner. Today we're going to talk about Kamailio, FreeSWITCH, and you. Our quick agenda for the day is going to be introduction. We'll talk about what is Kamailio, why you might use Kamailio, and some integration thoughts. And I know that we're running a little bit late and that everybody's been really patient, so I am going to try to be quick and leave a little bit of room for questions and still be good on time. Okay. So let's start with just a quick introduction. And they joked about it earlier today, but Kama what? So I've written it out in a way that might help you pronounce it. Kamailio. It's a Hawaiian word that means to communicate. And funny enough, our last speaker, Allison, who is just amazing, by the way, and her prices are fantastic. So I know we used her at several of the businesses I've been involved with. It's just some of the best resources out there for phone prompts and voices. But anyway, at Kamailio website, we do have a sound prompt of Allison saying Kamailio, and you can download that for free at kamailio.org. My name is Fred Posner, and I'm based in Florida. There's a picture of me and my beautiful wife and daughter. I've been using FreeSWITCH in production since 2008. I'm a consultant, as it was said, with LOD and the Posner Group. I'm honored to be a member of the Kamailio project, and for this presentation, I'm expecting that you have little to no Kamailio knowledge. I know that Daniel's earlier today was a good one, especially technically. Mine is going to be more conceptually about how to integrate Kamailio with FreeSWITCH. I am expecting that you are familiar with FreeSWITCH and that you basically know what it is and what you can do with it, and that you're somewhat familiar with VoIP. To reach me, my favorite method is using Matrix. Hopefully everyone is using Matrix out there. Matrix has been involved in ClueCon in the past, and we've had some fun. I'm also on Twitter and qxork.com. For any other old phone person, those are letters that don't need to be spelled out. Okay, so what is Kamailio? Well, for 20 years, Kamailio has been a central part of any unified communications platform, and we have this year celebrated the 20th birthday of Kamailio. The first commit was 20 years ago. Exciting times. So Kamailio is an open source SIP server, SIP proxy, SIP registrar, SIP location server, SIP application server, SIP dispatcher server, SIP WebSocket. You'll notice the word SIP a lot. If it's SIP, we'd love to work with it. So Kamailio is an open source SIP server. The modular architecture, so there's a core, then some internal libraries and module interface to extend functionality, much like FreeSWITCH, where I can load modules that are needed. And if I want an even smaller footprint than I would normally have, I can, not load certain modules. Kamailio doesn't have a default, okay, here's all the modules that you want loaded. So we have a core and several modules that you most likely need. We have some examples, but we get a very small footprint. There's over 200 modules that are out there and supported. We have a plug and play modular interface, so you can add new ones. There's new ones added all the time. And it because of this architecture, it allows for pretty solid stability. Again, we have 20 years in here now. Everything is open source. You can configure Kamailio with either a config file, which uses a Kamailio scripting language, which is very basic and very similar to anything that you've seen other places. However, and we had a great presentation just a few minutes ago about Lua, we also have a Chemi interface, which is an extended language interface that allows you to, let's say, do your Kamailio configuration in Lua. You could do it in Python. You can do it in JavaScript. And there's a couple other languages there. And we also have some RPC control as well. So fast, many different ways. Like I said, lots of new modules. In fact, just some new modules released this year is, for example, some stir and shaken modules, a WebSocket, that's the LWSC is for data sending using libWebSockets library, JSON Web Token generation and validation module, which is really kind of goes hand in hand with stir and shaken and everything, but it's a lot of fun. New modules all the time. It's kind of easy to think about what isn't Kamailio. And Kamailio is not a back-to-back user agent. It's not a SIP phone. It's not a media server, and it doesn't do transcoding. Now, what does those things really well? FreeSWITCH, right? So when used with FreeSWITCH, you get a very, very powerful system. Now, I have some asterisks there next to media server and transcoding because it's very common to run RTP engine with Kamailio to help you proxy media, and RTP engine will do transcoding and technically can play files and everything. That being said, and something I say all the time, FreeSWITCH is absolutely the best Opus transcoder out there. So if you're doing anything with Opus to another codec, no reason to use anything other than FreeSWITCH. It's just absolutely the best out there. So if FreeSWITCH is the best at doing certain things, why would you use Kamailio? Well, some things are just better when you combine them together. So FreeSWITCH can do certain things phenomenally. Kamailio can handle SIP extremely efficiently and fast. So when you put these two together, you can really build a solution that allows for security, scalability, some bridging, high availability, and more things like that. There's some amazing bridging options that we'll go over in just a second, but let's talk about security. Kamailio really easily can identify and help block SQL injections, SIP flooding, tremendous amount of different types of authentication, and you can use it as a SIP edge router, almost like an SBC. There's a whole discussion on what is an SBC that I'll save for another time or drinks. But let's look at security. So you can just achieve a great amount of security by just putting Kamailio in front of a FreeSWITCH. So in its most simple state, Kamailio can act as just a simple SIP edge router for just even one FreeSWITCH node, right? So you can have FreeSWITCH with, let's say, a NATed IP and have all your SIP and RTP pass through Kamailio, which would then handle all the natting and everything like that. Even though, of course, FreeSWITCH does NAT fantastically, you can have Kamailio handle that because it makes it easy to go with scalability as well. So with that same kind of security, I can also easily just make FreeSWITCH now an N+1. Many reasons why you would do this, right? But the same design that you just had in the last slide can now easily scale by just adding more nodes. Okay, and especially when you're using private IPs for FreeSWITCH, this becomes extremely scalable. So Kamailio can decide, okay, certain calls go to this FreeSWITCH, certain call goes to that FreeSWITCH, or maybe I'm handling the failover or things like that. You know, you might have, there's an example everyone likes to say how many calls you can have on FreeSWITCH, and you can have a tremendous amount of calls on there. But if you think about the Jurassic Park principle, just because you can do something doesn't mean you always should. So when there is a problem with hardware or something else like that, I personally like it when there's fewer calls that go down. And sometimes that helps by having more machines to spread those across. So that's just one way that an N+1 architecture can really help you out. This being said, as you grow and grow and grow, and you go, okay, you know what, that SQL server that I had on that same FreeSWITCH is now kind of taking a lot of CPU, and I'd like to reserve that CPU for FreeSWITCH. Sure, move that out. And let's say we'll even add a Redis. And by doing that same kind of design, now I can scale incredibly, right? And I can even have different aspects of systems share data, right? So FreeSWITCH can update SQL or Redis, and Kamailio can reach the two because they all talk to each other. And then that easily scales into global geographical redundancy, right? So now I can have a West data center and an East data center. Kamailio has something called DMQ, which is a distributed messaging queue. Basically, Kamailio uses SIP to talk to each other and can keep call states and send information, update whatever you would like on certain things. So that helps me have geographical redundancy of systems in a call center and just place them as wherever you need. And the next step that's very popular today in handling something like this is, of course, moving towards an Anycast situation, right? Where Kamailio can work with Anycast. This would be an example of just one type of Anycast design, where maybe you'd have everything come in through a gateway node of Kamailio that goes to, a main processing node, and then those then diverse whatever needs to go to a FreeSWITCH and things like that. So the scalability becomes just N+1. When you need more, you just add more. When you talk about users and things like that, a Kamailio server by itself, with just minimal amount of RAM and CPU, 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 users is nothing that would be unheard of. So when we talk about scaling Kamailio with several nodes and things like that, you're really talking a tremendous amount of users and endpoints and SIP processing that can just be handled very well. Some of the other aspects I talked about was bridging. And, sometimes keeping your FreeSWITCH as simple as possible makes it easy to replicate or make changes. So on FreeSWITCH, I don't have to allow IPv6. I could just keep everything with a simple private IP of, in IPv4, and I could just keep everything just SIP, UDP, right? And I can have Kamailio bridge IPv6 to IPv4. I can have Kamailio bridge the WebRTC just to SIP, things like that. Even taking it a step further, I can have Kamailio handle all of my TLS and all of my SRTP. If my FreeSWITCH is private, I can have Kamailio do SRTP to the endpoint, but just regular RTP to FreeSWITCH, and just regular UDP, which allows really nice high availability within FreeSWITCH itself, right? Because now that's just UDP and RTP. And so, it just allows scalability in that aspect by also using bridging. So, it makes certificate management a lot easier, and it can really simplify your FreeSWITCH setup there. Again, moving a little bit quick because I want to leave just a little bit of room for questions and also get some of your time back. But some integration thoughts. PIKE module is one of the modules that we have. It's been for 15 years, so it's been in there for a long time, and it handles basically anti-flood handling. You can use it with another module called HTable that could then handle it for, let's say, a longer block time, or do sharing, like I said, with that distributed message queue, so that if I flood one Kamailio, I can then share that IP with all my other Kamailios and automatically block it from hitting anything in my network, for example. And basically, you can use this in combination with these modules to proactively protect your network. And so this says, okay, a certain amount of packets have hit me from the same IP in whatever time frame you want. So let's say it's a 24 SIP packets from the same IP in 2 seconds, or and I might have a list of where carriers can do that, but endpoints can never do that, something like that. And then if I reach that threshold, go, okay, you know what, you're doing a little too much, let me block it. And then with that, you can even run commands. I put out something called IP tables API, which is just a little Go interface for IP tables. So you could then block it in IP tables, which of course is a very efficient way of blocking it, not in the application space, but in the network space, and just help your system when you are experiencing some flooding attacks. Now, I'm not talking about the DDoS attacks, because those are not going to survive a single Linux box, and we can have an entire discussion. I think you will be in 2 days having a discussion on DDoS as well. The SECFILTER, or the security filter module, is an easy way of managing allow and block lists, where you can block by user agent, IP, country, domains, users. It automatically does SQL injection blocking. So this is some of those aspects that I was talking about before, where Kamailio does SIP really well. So an inspection level on Kamailio, for example, looking in the SIP packet for the type of user agent that you're doing, is absolutely simple for Kamailio to do, and then taking action on that. And then the nice thing is that Kamailio has the option of just ignoring it. So a package or a packet can come in from an IP that you don't want, or with a SQL injection, or with a user agent that you know to be never on your network, and then you could just ignore it. So just drop it. So you're not sending a response to the user. You're not doing anything like that. You are just dropping it and moving on. And so there's a kind of a, obscuring yourself from visibility in a good way by not giving a negative response. But when we talk about, some of these user agents and everything, I'm sure Sandro, who's going to be talking to you, I think tomorrow or the next day, will have much better information. So he's a great one to listen to. And then one of the last concepts I want to talk about when moving over is, we talked briefly, I said how many users can be run with Kamailio, that, it's nothing to blink at to have 20, 30,000 users, or, even over 100. So when moving to Kamailio or thinking about Kamailio, you have to decide, okay, should I offload my users and just have Kamailio handle everything, or should I do a mid-registration? Okay, and a mid-registrar is where Kamailio would still pass on the authentication to FreeSWITCH. FreeSWITCH would still handle all of the presence, would handle the user location, the voicemail, everything as you normally would. So you already have, let's say, 2,000 users, but let's say those registrations are coming in at least once a minute, right? Because most of those users are probably natted or something, or the phone's just, chatty Cathy over there, and it's just sending these requests to you all the time. And so as you start getting more and more of these requests, then you start getting more and more of the presence, and before you know it, your CPU is just growing through the roof. So you can add a mid-registrar, which Kamailio will stand in between the internet and your end users and FreeSWITCH. When you get a positive authentication from FreeSWITCH, it will say, okay, let me tell FreeSWITCH that this user really requested it for an hour. FreeSWITCH is fine with that. So FreeSWITCH won't see anything from that user for another hour. And then Kamailio will just handle all those other keep alives and constant registration. When it sends the registration back again, Kamailio will just say, okay, because it knows who that user is, the IP, everything. And it will just act as a mid-registrar for that. Works tremendously helpful in reducing call volume to your FreeSWITCH and letting it handle more. So it's a great stepping stone to then maybe offloading users completely to Kamailio, and just have Kamailio handle all the authentication and everything like that. In regards to mid-registration, it's something that we've done in Kamailio since 2010. We use the UAC module, but it can also be custom. I have an example of that on GitHub. But Kamailio will also handle the security. So when somebody says, for example, that there's, when the user got rejected, you can also choose to not allow that IP to continue and sending more for a dictionary attack or anything like that. So you can block those from ever going back to FreeSWITCH in the first place. And you can handle multiple FreeSWITCH nodes. So I could say, okay, well, this user goes to this FreeSWITCH, this user goes to this FreeSWITCH, this company is on this FreeSWITCH, however you want to do it. So Kamailio can work with you on load balancing that N+1 architecture. Now, when you offload, again, hundreds of thousands of users is not an issue for putting that on Kamailio. So when you're really growing, I really think it's time to consider not using all the users in FreeSWITCH itself, but considering a hybrid approach, and then let FreeSWITCH handle the media, the conferencing, the queues, everything with call manipulation, transcoding, everything like that, but then have user authentication, presence, those kind of things handled mostly on Kamailio. What brought me into Kamailio in the first place was dealing with a thundering herd. At the time, we only had 5,000 users, I think, maybe 2,000, trying to remember. And both of our internet connections were cut, which was phenomenal. This was early 2000s. And when it came back on, all of our users were trying to register at the same time. And we were running an Acme packet SBC, and it died. It just could not handle it. And even though we had a very good support plan, before they would get back to us, which was over 24 hours, we were able to put up a Kamailio, or at the time it was OpenSARE, and handle the 5,000 users without blinking. And it worked so well that we didn't even think it was working at first. There were just no errors. They were just all registered. It took us a while to figure out that it was actually working, which I'm sure we've all been there with something that we've done where it just works better than you expected. And from that day, I was just in love with this project. And I'm super honored to be as involved as I am with Kamailio. It's just been an honor. How do you start doing this? Reach out and ask. So Kamailio.org, we are a very friendly community. Okay, SIP isn't the easiest thing to learn and to master, but it's all makes sense the more you do it. I had a full head of hair when I started, but we're a friendly community. You can reach out to us through any of the mailing lists that are available on Kamailio.org. We have a very active mailing list. It's very responsive as well. There's a Slack, there's a Matrix, a whole Matrix space and room and everything like that. We're also still on IRC. I believe we moved over to the liver chat, or what all the cool kids are still doing. And, it's the older you get, the more you realize sometimes just asking for help. And the first step was probably the smarter idea. And with that, I hopefully have just a few minutes for any kind of questions that you like, which is usually my favorite part of the presentation. So if you have anything, I'd love to hit them up. We used to make cookies, but the bakery is no longer. You can reach me at qxork.com. Kamailio is at kamailio.org. And on Twitter, I'm Fred Posner. And with that, I hope to hear your questions.
Thanks, Fred. So we're going to go ahead and take a moment, and we're going to open the floor to questions. If anybody in person or remote has questions, feel free to come up. If you're remote, go ahead and type them in the chat. That way we can get them addressed too. Leave a couple moments for that.
Now, it used to be that if you asked a good question, you got a cookie. So I'm sorry I can't do that this year. That was my favorite part of these aspects, and I'm really hoping that I could see everybody next year. I was hoping to do it this year, of course, but just didn't work out. So I definitely miss being there with you all in person.
Yeah, it's been interesting, but we're grateful to be able to do what we can. While I can't offer cookies and I'm a terrible baker, I will give somebody a solid elbow bump instead.
All right. Well, if there are no, oh, is there something on chat or? Just a thanks. All right. Well, with that, I'm definitely grateful for your times today and everything like that.